Good morning. I'm Reverend Tony Lorenzen, the minister at the Mattatuck Unitarian Universalist Society and the Unitarian Universalist Church in Meriden. I'm really happy you were able to join us here this morning for this morning's service. I am actually away right now taking some time off, resting up from a lot of the ministry we've been doing during this pandemic. Hope to come back refreshed and re-energized and reinvigorated, really ready to kick off a strong fall program. But right now I'm doing some gardening, trying to play some tennis, take some walks, do some reading. Take it easy. I hope you're able to do some of that during these summer months as well. I'm really grateful to the church for allowing me this time. It's wonderful to have a very just and compassionate employer. I invite you to enjoy this morning's service. We have a lot of great programs this summer on the theme of emergence in August. And I think you'll really like being with us, and we hope to see you again.
Come into this sanctuary of time and bring what you will. Your hopes and fears, your joys and sorrows, your peace and anxiety. And bring you your sense of possibility, your sense of humor, your imagination and your openness to what is and what can be. As we worship together, might we do so with heightened awareness of this slice of history in which we reside. May we practice loving community because it takes so much practice. May we do all possible to advance justice that is compassionate. And may we stretch our souls and open our hearts to the spirit of life and love. Let us worship together this morning.
Why a flaming chalice, the question comes. It's the cup of life, we answer. A cup of blessings overflowing, a cup of water to quench our spirit's thirst, a cup of wine for celebration and dedication. The flame of truth, the fire of purification, oil for anointing, healing. Out of chaos, fear, and horror, thus was the symbol crafted a generation ago. So may it be for us in these days of uncertainty, sorrow, and rage, and a light to warm our souls and guide us home.
Have you ever heard a story that we light? Many of you have, many of you haven't. I'll give you a hint. It's the story behind what we just experienced. We lit our chalice. Let's also light the story behind it. For many of you, it's not a new story. And for many of you joining us, perhaps for the first or second time, it's a brand new story. Not quite a century ago, this world was jarred to its core by a war, a world war. This nation didn't join forces to resist the powers of imperialism and racism until what evolved into World War II had been raging for 2 years. But the lives and livelihoods of our sisters and brothers in Germany and Austria and elsewhere in Europe were already amid one of the most horrific passages of human history. Our Jewish, gypsy, and gay neighbors, our gay and lesbian sisters and brothers had been targeted by the evil powers of Nazism. Many had already perished. Hans Deutsch was an Austrian artist living in Paris in the 1930s. He dared to draw cartoons of Adolf Hitler, the brutal leader who was just coming to power as Der Führer, or the leader of the Nazis. Can you imagine that hundreds and thousands of Germans lined the streets and cheered as Hitler passed by in grand processions? When Hitler and his armies invaded Paris, Deutsch fled. He fled all the way to Portugal. Anybody know where Portugal is? You can see it on this map. And you can see the distance that Deutsch fled from Paris in northern France, southwest. It was there that he met Reverend Charles Joy. Joy led the Unitarian Service Committee. You're right, it's now the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, but the Unitarians and Universalists hadn't yet decided to blend families. The Service Committee had just been formed to help Jews and others targeted by Hitler to escape to freedom. Joy was at the helm of a top secret web of agents risking their lives to liberate the women and men and children fleeing for their lives. Hans Deutsch soon found himself working closely with Reverend Joy, not because he shared his beliefs as a Unitarian, but because he saw Joy living his beliefs. Imagine, just imagine, you're 10 years old. You and your family are Jewish. It's the darkest of nights, and you hold tight to your mother's hand. Your little brother is close behind, with your father holding his hand and then picking him up and carrying him because the journey is so long. You had already walked more hours than you had energy to count. You walked so softly because any sudden noise could alert the people you feared. And you walked carefully because you were crossing a pass in the Pyrenees Mountains, a string of mountains dividing Spain and France. It was rugged walking, as you can see. And remember, it was nighttime. You dare not let go of your mother's hand. You were supposed to meet someone who would lead you to safety, to sanctuary. But if you were a Jew or a gay or a gypsy and you were fleeing for your life, you didn't know whom to trust. And you needed official papers to get from one point to another across these mountains. Reverend Joy had asked his artist friend Hans Deutsch to create a symbol for the papers that were needed so that these papers would look official and show the spirit of the Unitarian Service Committee. Joy sketched a chalice with the flame rising from within it, and Deutsch took it from there. The chalice, or cup, is an ancient religious symbol, and the burning oil, the flame rising, is a symbol of help and often sacrifice. Joy's sketch and Deutsch's design became a seal for papers that when someone held them in the sight of you and your family and others fleeing the Nazis, signaled trust. At last, you heard the faintest of footsteps approaching. Your heart was pounding. Just around the bend, lit by the faintest of moonlight, you and your family looked up to see this symbol, a flaming chalice, held by a man who nodded yes and greeted you with the warmest of silence. He led you on through the dark night. You walked and you walked, but you no longer felt tired. Your heart swelled with hope. Night had been your friend, and light the herald of a new day. Over the years, the flaming chalice became the symbol of the now blended family that is Unitarian Universalism. There are many, many forms of the chalice. This morning, we have lit one. Perhaps you have lit your own at home. Each chalice, kindled and luminous, reminds us to keep our light shining and to live this faith that we share. is that sound? A train whistle? I don't see a train. But I'm in a train. I'm on a train. I'm alone, but you're with me. And we're rapidly approaching lights are out. Even the lights on this train. What's going on? I try to look out the window, and all I see is darkness. I hold my breath, which I know is what I need not to do when I have no idea what's going on. And suddenly, the lights return, the lights on the train, that is. I continue to stare out the window. We're still in a tunnel. Then it dawns on me, a train is its own kind of tunnel. I'm a tunnel inside a tunnel. Am I dreaming? Will I wake up? Will we wake up? Will we emerge? May you live in interesting times. It's an ancient Chinese saying, an ancient Chinese blessing, a dubious blessing perhaps, but one that calls us to mindfulness of the time of history that we occupy. I believe that a spiritually rich life is a life of mindfulness and compassion. Mindfulness of the world into which we were born, the world with which we are intimately connected, family, friends, neighbors, workplace, and perhaps faith community, and the world with which we are ultimately connected. Neighbors across the country and across the world, neighbors with the same hopes and dreams that we have, though expressed through countless cultural lenses, and neighbors with the same foibles and frailties to which we are vulnerable, manifest through a multitude of tempting cultural assumptions. An architecture common to every culture offers an image of mindfulness for these intensely interesting times. Homo more or less sapiens holds no monopoly on this architectural form. Yet I wonder if we are the species least resilient to negotiating our way in and through such a distinctive space. I speak of the tunnel, the shape of dreams, the shape of non-dreams. Here we are, not dreaming, amid what we might deem an intersection of tunnels, a confluence of passages, a veritable labyrinth of uncertainties. What to do but summon my imagination, my reserves of courage, and the knowledge that I am in good company to take one more step and one more step and one more step, much like the 10-year-old, hand in hand with her mother and the rest of her family, crossing that seemingly endless passage of the Pyrenees in the darkest of nights, led by the trust that he who held the image of the flaming chalice would lead them into a new dawn. Fear and hope are iconic partners in these dreamlike passages we travel in the time that is now. There is, of course, that friend or family member who appears to have the future all wrapped up in a neat ball of the borderline despair we call cynicism. Some of you may be familiar with a comic strip called Shu. Shu is a harumphy-looking character with an affinity for the dark side of the moon. Sketch him in your mind's eye. A stout bird with a big bill. He leans back in his desk chair, a newspaper in his lap, his grubby shoes atop his trash can of a desk, and a cigar hanging out of his bill. Not his mouth, his bill. Off to the side, his neighbors, the wizard, a long-bearded bird, and his friend, the accountant, endowed with a generous duckbill sitting at his own messy desk, are in commentary mode. Would you say Shu is pessimistic? The wizard asks the accountant. The accountant counters with his own question. What would you say about someone who always sees the tunnel at the end of a light? Might we say that Shu has lost his footing? Who among us is not vulnerable to losing our footing as we contemplate the prospects of emerging from these stifling passageways of our time? I speak of the intersecting pandemics that can feel like forever tunnels. The lethal virus of COVID-19, the economic crisis to which those among us who are Black and brown and indigenous and undocumented are especially reeling. The ongoing scourge of racism that I deem the original sin of this nation. And the crisis of individuals in positions of power who have sold their souls again and again. Is it any wonder that we might just empathize with Shu? But consider the first tunnel through which you traveled. If that is, your passage was through the most common of exits. I speak of the birth canal. Not a very long tunnel unless you were the woman giving birth or you were that about to be full breathing baby pushing and shoving your way out. And what happens when you emerge? Your eyes are tightly shut and you let out a scream. What did you get yourself into? Your eyes are tightly shut. You can't really see yet. And you'd grown so comfy in that nice, comfy cave, that nice dark cave, until you had no choice. You simply had no choice but to wiggle your way out. But the light, it's blinding. It took you how long to catch your breath? If you're part of this morning's congregation, you made it. You're here. You emerged from that first scary tunnel. How will we emerge from this harrowing intersection of tunnels? This harrowing intersection of pandemics? How will we emerge from the pandemic that is the COVID-19 virus? When will it happen? Effective treatment, a vaccine, and full access to both? What will it take? How will we emerge from the ongoing, deeply rooted pandemic that is racism? Consider those lyrics of James Weldon Johnson. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. If only the reality of those words were in a permanently past tense. The veritable lynching of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Eric Garner, and yes, 6 years ago this past Thursday, Michael Brown. And so many more sisters and brothers and mothers and fathers and daughters and sons of color. Precious lives brutally cut short. What will it take? What will it take to dismantle white supremacy? How will we emerge from the pandemic that is economic inequality on steroids? How will we continue to absorb the commonly defensive assertion from both sides of the political aisle, I am a capitalist, while neglecting to voice penetrating questions about what kind of economic system actually serves the common good? Capitalism, as it is practiced, is yet another virus, another pandemic. As for the crisis of leadership, that long, dark tunnel of illusory governance, might we summon all possible savvy and stamina to ensure that voting is guaranteed for every citizen and that each ballot is counted. The pandemics that mark these interesting times are woven. The tunnels through which we travel intersect, and we have yet to emerge. From where does my hope come? From you, from all of you who are capable and have already accomplished all that you have already accomplished. From the exemplars of the late Representative John Lewis and the Reverend C.T. Vivian, and from the heroism of teachers and nurses and doctors and researchers and sanitation workers, artists, and I could go on and on. Let's get back to you. It was just over a year ago that this congregation celebrated Suhitno Sahuti's first steps into the light of day after 599 days in sanctuary at this Unitarian Universalist Church in Meriden. It was early autumn 2017 when you made the bold decision to become a sanctuary congregation. The Board of Trustees was unanimous in the decision to move ahead, and the congregation was close to unanimous in support of this decision. It evolved from some of you having been present at a vigil on behalf of our undocumented neighbors on the Meriden Green just a week or so before this time. You were inspired and motivated, and this morphed into a commitment to act. It was a commitment tested by high uncertainty. Who knew that Suhitno and Dahlia would reside in an upper room at the meeting house for 599 days? And that the meeting house kitchen would be their kitchen also. And that the meeting rooms and sanctuary would be the locale for so many strategy sessions, press conferences, and fundraisers. This was not an easy tunnel through which to pass. And if it wasn't easy for some of you or some of us, remember and imagine how it was for Suhitno and Dahlia. There were no guarantees that a stay would be granted, but we did not move through this tunnel alone. So many other congregations, especially the Unitarian Universalist Society of New Haven in Hamden and the Muhammad Islamic Center of Greater Hartford, were there with their all-out support. As for legal counsel, the consistent efforts and final success of Diana Blanc and the New Haven legal assistance team. As for political advocacy and clout, the ongoing presence and outspokenness of Senator Richard Blumenthal, State Attorney General William Tong, and City Councilman Miguel Castro were present, ever present, on Suhitno's behalf. Recall the story of the flaming chalice that I shared earlier. In its original function, it signaled sanctuary, safety, refuge. The team that we formed, with the stellar leadership of Nancy Burton, was aptly deemed the Chalice Sanctuary Team. And so it was, and so it evolved into a passage that began in the late hours of October 9th, 2017, continued with high uncertainty and trepidation, and with resolve born again and again, and concluded with a stay being granted for Suhitno and therefore for Dahlia on May 31st, 2019. We celebrated. We celebrated. We celebrated hope realized, however dim that hope often was and often became over the course of those days that were so very long for Suhitno and Dahlia. How now to hold hope for the tunnels through which we travel? How to maintain perspective that they are even passageways and not horrifically permanent states of being. When my capacity for hope dwindles to barely a flicker, I turn to the seasoned wisdom of the late historian and justice activist Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn is also the author of A People's History of the United States. And through his 2004 article in The Nation titled The Optimism of Uncertainty, Zinn spoke, and he speaks to me still. In this awful world where the efforts of caring people often pale in comparison to what is done by those who have power, how do I manage to stay involved and remain seemingly happy? There is a tendency to think that what we see in the present moment will continue. We forget how often we have been astonished by the sudden crumbling of institutions, by extraordinary changes in people's thoughts, by unexpected eruptions of rebellion against tyrannies, by the quick collapse of system of power that seemed invincible. What leaps out from the history of the past 100 years is its utter unpredictability. A revolution to overthrow the Tsar of Russia and that most sluggish of semi-feudal empires not only startled the most advanced imperial powers, but took Lenin himself by surprise and sent him rushing by train to Petrograd. Who would have predicted the bizarre shifts of World War II, the Nazi-Soviet pact, and the German army rolling through Russia apparently invincible, causing colossal casualties being turned back at the gates of Leningrad, followed by the defeat of the German army, with Hitler huddled in his Berlin bunker, waiting to die. The United States waged a full-scale war in Indochina, conducting the most brutal bombardment of a tiny peninsula in world history, and yet was forced to withdraw. April 1975. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, courage, sacrifice, and kindness. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world off in a different direction. We kindle our chalice not with naivete, but with hope grounded in the transforming power of love tested and tried over the centuries. That long ago 10-year-old emerged from a long dark night and a perilous passage into a new day. Suhitno and Dahlia emerged from 599 days in virtual captivity, that we call it sanctuary. In the face of anonymous combatants, protesters continue to fill the streets of this nation on the edge. Black lives matter. And wait, I'm catching a glimmer. I'm catching a glimmer of am I dreaming? What do you think? Amen and amen.
This time of pandemic has been financially difficult for a lot of people. Some of those people are members of our congregation. Some of those people are members of the communities that our congregation serve in Greater Meriden and Greater Woodbury. I would really appreciate it if all of you who could do so, please give generously by donating online or sending checks into the church. During this time, we need your financial support more than ever. You are making a difference with every dollar you donate, helping us pay rent for people, helping us provide food for people, helping people survive while they are unemployed or underemployed during this time of pandemic. Thanks for your generosity. We deeply appreciate it.
Amid this passage, both promising and perilous, may we find grace in the kindling of a common chalice, hope in the lighting of an inner chalice, and energy in the transforming power of love. May it be so, and amen.